Welcome back, folks. You're watching Day Prime, and I have my first guest with me because I don't count with me as a guest. I don't let him count with me, period. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Brown. Welcome to Day Prime.
Thank
Doctor?
you. Thank you, Kevin. Just Kevin.
Just Kevin. You don't call it doctor. I mean, you work hard for it, you know.
Yeah, I've earned it. I have earned it, but you can call me Kevin.
All right, Kevin. You have a PhD in rhetoric and composition.
Right.
Could you explain to us what that is?
Well, I have a PhD in English with a specialization in rhetoric and composition. Mm-hmm. Composition is the use of writing, right? Mm-hmm. So we're thinking about academic discourse, we're thinking about nonfiction, creative writing, and the study of writing in all its different levels. Now, when we think about rhetoric, rhetoric is the use of language, all forms of language, right? Physical, metaphysical, spiritual, scribal, that is the written, performative, etc., to influence the choices other people make, right? So it's the interplay of method, motive, and outcome, you see. And a rhetorician, which is what I am, is able to think about that interplay and see if you can orient that toward particular outcomes, right? And for particular desires, see? So in the case of a rhetorician like me, it would be for conscious citizenship and social uplift.
I was reading your, your bio, and it spoke a lot about Caribbean carnivalesque.
Right.
Exactly what? Could you explain that to us?
Good question. The Caribbean carnivalesque is this framework that looks at activity as, again, the interplay of these different factors, right? That one is never outside of language, one is never outside of discourse, one is never outside of a performance. You see, you're always implicated in a performance.
In everyday life?
Everyday life especially, right? So I make the distinction in the book that I'm not talking about the carnival as such. The carnival is an event, and more so it's a culmination of desires, right? So to look at the carnival exclusively is problematic, right? It's myopic, let's say. Right? I look at everyday life, the entire spectrum of Caribbean existence, the entire spectrum of performance, of understanding, of response, every aspect of expression, Caribbean expression, and the interplay with Caribbean and the rest of the world, right? It falls within the scope of rhetorical study. Right? Okay. So I look at it as carnivalesque because it has this implicit performativity, but it also is included in how we understand what one needs to teach, to do to teach, to enjoy things, to have pleasure, and to mix those pleasures, problematically or not, to have certain outcomes.
Okay. Is it that Caribbean people are more natural performers than the rest of the world?
No, I'm not going to... Good, no. I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is that Caribbean people have a particular sensibility, which is what makes them Caribbean, or what allows them to identify as Caribbean, right? So they have certain features, whether it's in language, for example, the use of Creole, right? The use of patois, right? The use of different standards from the basilect all the way up to the mesolect and the acrolect, right? They have this sociolinguistic range, right? The Creole continuum, we call it in sociolinguistics. I don't know if it's still fashionable to even call it the Creole continuum, right? But to look at all those different factors from the perspective of Caribbean folks, right? Now, there's this theorist called Mikhail Bakhtin who talks about the carnivalesque from Russian dialogism, right? I make the point fairly early that I'm not talking about Russian dialogism. Russian dialogism cannot successfully or effectively be applied to a Caribbean sensibility. So even though I use carnivalesque with the same efficiency and sufficiency that I use the word rhetoric, I'm not saying that Caribbean people are Greek or that we're derived from Greece, right? I'm not saying that our sense of citizenship is derived from an Athenian model, right? I'm saying that when we understand what a Caribbean society is, what it can do, then we are better able to move forward. And the idea really is to move forward. The idea is not to stay stuck, right? Whether it's in crisis or in stagnation, but to move forward.
how do we go about understanding what a Caribbean society is and its basis and...
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, I would love to say I have all the answers to that, right? But I don't. The fact is, I think the way we begin is to ask questions, right? As a Caribbean people, as a people of a global society, we have forgotten how to ask questions and to question ourselves, you see? And once you lose the ability or the impulse, the impetus to question yourself, then you have given in to self-policing, you've given in to what forms of oppression there may be, you've given in to silencing, you've given in to marginalization, you've given in to invisibility, right? So the way to begin is to stop giving in to these negative aspects, right? Now, I've heard people off and on for the last 5 months since I've been here talk about how Trinidad needs a revolution, right? And I say, well, yeah, but not the kind of revolution that you're thinking. We need a revolution of thought. And revolution is about turning, revolution is about change, revolution is about actually understanding in new and different ways, or even some of the old ways, how we're able to reorient ourselves again for the purpose of social uplift.
But what do you think are the right questions that need to be asked to kickstart that revolution of thought?
I don't know if it'll kickstart the revolution of thought necessarily. I think what it'll do is perhaps get us thinking, right? So to ask the basic existential questions, who are we? Not to take for granted what we think we are, or even what we know we are, right? But to ask ourselves, really, who are we, and find ways to articulate that. And there are ways that exist right now that help us to articulate that. You look at calypso music, you look at soca music, you look at dancehall music, you look at mass, old mass, bikini and beads, you name it, the entire spectrum is rife with answers that help us to articulate who we are. But if we're not inclined to ask, then these things come by, they pass like a tide, and what ends up happening is that we miss the point. Now we could hope that it comes back next year, right? But like a team that waits for its next chance in the UEFA Cup, right? You know, Barcelona Galaxy the other day, and I was not too unhappy about that, right? So they didn't even make it to the final, but you keep saying, well, next year, right? There's a carnival mentality that is problematic because it allows us to ignore that what we're facing is urgent, but it is also very long in achieving, right? Who are we? What are we trying to do? If we're in crisis, right, and we're looking to see if we can make a difference, who are we trying to make this difference for? When you say together we aspire, together we achieve, it's almost as if you have to put a question mark on that, right? You have to say together we aspire to what? Together we achieve what? If together we achieve a crisis or things get worse as a result of that togetherness or performance of togetherness, then we really have to question that achievement, you see? And aspirations that are themselves hollow will yield only achievements that are false and that will not stand. So.
We were debating this before this show. I don't know, see if you can explain. I don't know if you covered it already.
Okay.
Something slipped me. But a part of the bio says this work also implicitly addresses the assumption that texts produced by non-Caribbeans are somehow out of analytical reach when Caribbean method is applied.
Yeah, well, basically that is me validating my particular perspective, right? It's me taking as valid and good and strong and pretty smart, right, my particular approach to understanding different texts, right? So if you take my particular ego out of it, right, and you say, how can you read Bakhtin, for example, since we talked about Bakhtin just now, how can you read Bakhtin through a Lovelace? How can you read Bakhtin through a Minshall, right? How do you read Bakhtin through a Jamaica Kincaid, right? Now, if you apply the frameworks of Bakhtin, Glissant, right? If you look at the market woman who has never seen herself, well, not never, who hasn't seen herself in about 25 years because she's been busy living and doing things, right? So she doesn't have the time really to practice that self-consciousness or that self-reflectivity. And you read experience through her eyes. What ends up happening, right? Interesting things at the very least, but a new and critical perspective on life that doesn't take for granted the vernacular. It doesn't take for granted day-to-day experience. It doesn't take for granted notions of impropriety, you see? So that's what I'm talking about. So again, the articulation will enable you to start making and taking certain positions.
Okay, well, Seeing Blue exhibition and book signing will be at Cool Breeze Bar at Shodo Road in Paramin,
Right.
June the 1st from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. It is free of charge.
Right.
What will be being exhibited?
Well, during Carnival this year, I took about 2,500 photographs of the Blue Devils. So it would be all of about 30 of the shots. I was able to spend 2 days with the Blue Devils, quite by chance, because I ended up in Paramin. All right, not looking for Paramin, but rather looking for myself, you see. I found myself in Paramin, in a way to say, right?
In the Blue Devils.
In the Blue Devils, right? But also in Paramin, the people, right? So more broadly, in what I was able to experience talking to people, discovering, not even exploring, but discovering things about myself that I had forgotten, right? So as a way to show not only respect, but gratitude, I wanted to give back. So the photographs, which have been valued at about $25,000,
wow.
I'm going to be giving them back to the community, framed, signed, etc., as a gesture that shows that kind of respect, but also as an effort to build bridges between communities, myself and others.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dr. Kevin, sorry. We
You're
thank you for
doctor.
joining us. Yes, you earned it, man. Dr. Kevin, we thank you for joining us today on Day Prime.
Thank you so
We're going
much
to
for
take a little
having me.
break and we'll be right back with more. Stay tuned.
All right, thanks a lot. All right.